So wanted to just welcome people as you're joining us today to our webinar series. Our webinar series is called Tanchk o Nish Nu Itatak, which translates to We Are Working as One. And this is our Catalyzing Change webinar series. Just wanted to make sure as people are coming on here that you know all lines are muted unless someone is speaking. And while you're waiting here for us to get started, please use the chat box to enter your name, your pronouns, and Indigenous lands that you are Zooming in from. As we go through today, you can use the chat function to ask a comment or post a question. Ask a question or post a comment. And we just ask that people be respectful. We're really excited about our guest speakers today and want to make sure people know that this is being recorded and that we are streaming live on Facebook. If you're on Facebook and wanting to call into or Zoom into the webinar, just click on the link to register and you will be sent an email with the Zoom to get in. So just again, please drop your name, your Indigenous lands that you're calling in from, and pronouns into the chat box, and we will get started shortly. And my name is Polly. I am Zooming in from Dena'ina lands, and I use she, her pronouns. Seeing a few people enter into the chat. It's great to see different places people are calling in from. Give it one more minute and then I'm going to be turning it to Shauna for a land recognition. Again, welcome. Really excited to see everybody coming in onto this webinar today. This is our Catalyzing Change policy webinar series. And it's called Tanchk o Nish Nut Itatak. That is my learning pronunciation. We are working as one. I'm going to now turn it to Shauna Larson, who is going to do a land acknowledgement.
And Sarita, Chamaka, I'm Shauna Larson. I'm Sukhbia on my mom's side from the village of Palawik, and I'm Atna on my dad's side from the village of Náay. And I just wanted to welcome all of you and also start out in the proper way of acknowledging the land that we're all on. We like to just offer some special thanks to our ancestors and the ancestors of all of the lands that we come from for taking care of the land, but also remember the people that are still here today and still continue to take care of our lands for our future generations. So thank you all.
Hi, thanks for everyone for joining. I'm super excited that this is all coming together. Kendra Kloster, I'm the Executive Director of Native Peoples Action and Native Peoples Action Community Fund. This is technically our second webinar. We first did a budget webinar and we got such great feedback that we decided that we needed to turn this into a series to really dive into policy and what it means. And so this is kind of our launch here, I guess, with our, maybe our first, I call it our second. A little bit about me though, I am originally from Wrangell and Juneau, and I live here on Dena'ina lands in Anchorage. Missing home right now. I'm kind of wishing I was heading home to go fishing, but trying to keep everybody safe by, you know, hunkering down as best as possible. And so looking at the bright side is it's opened up some new opportunities to really do things online and connect people across the state. So I definitely appreciate that. And just looking at the good side of things right now and being able to get to see all of you and spend some time with you today. Just a little bit about the series. First off, I do want to also say Chinan Gunash to Joel Isaac for his translation, our art, and that he worked with us on, and I appreciate that. You know, something we always want to do is uplift our native languages, and I'm excited to have Lagunai on today too to talk about the work of the languages bill. And I know there's a lot of people that were involved with that, and that was it was an exciting time. It was also had some frustrations, which I'll let her share. But just a little bit about the webinar series that we want to really dive into policies, but really understanding what policy means, what it means to all of us, how we can be making a difference through policy. And the other thing is really breaking down these barriers between our policy makers. That's looking at municipal level up to the state, and hopefully maybe sometime we can have our congressional delegation on too, to really break down those barriers and know that the people that are representing us are there for us, and we elect them and they need to be hearing from us. And so really passing on our knowledge to them so they can, you know, share it within the laws that they're creating and passing laws that really are going to be beneficial to all of Alaskans. So thanks for joining us. We have a lot of great things that we're going to talk about today and throughout this whole webinar series. I'll pass it over to Polly.
And Gunash Kendra, again, my name is Polly Carr. I am the director of the Alaska Center and the Alaska Center Education Fund. Really happy to be joining with these other partners on this webinar series. And again, calling in from Dena'ina lands. So I wanted to just follow up, Kendra. You know, these webinars are focusing on policy advocacy as a tool for change. And before we get started, I just wanted to ask people to share in the chat box what comes to mind when you think of the word policy, and what comes to mind when you think of the word advocacy. I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. Oh yeah, there we go. Suits and ties, big buildings, important but hard to navigate, making change, rules and bureaucracy, action, also policy, wonky government. Well, in breaking down these words, you know, policy is derived from the Latin and Greek roots, meaning a way of management, a practice of government, or a plan of action. And advocacy similarly derives from words meaning a call to or to add a voice or to support a cause. And as we saw in some of the chat responses, a lot of us are conditioned to think of policy advocacy as inaccessible or exclusive, boring or wonky, too technical, or just something that only certain people do. And yet, governing our lives and making plans for change and adding our voices for change are actually really powerful ways to shape our future. And the truth is that people have been doing it for thousands of years. So we want to, reclaim these words and show how they can lead to the work that many of us are doing to make our home a more just and equitable place. And I cannot think of two more suited individuals to help us understand that today than our two guest speakers that I'm about to introduce. And before I do that, I wanted to just go over some tips for how to best view our panelists. So please turn off your video if you're not one of the guest speakers. We will be muting all lines unless we're asking somebody to be speaking. And if you go to your own screen, you can click the 3 dots next to your name, and you can click on the hide non-video participants. So those are just some tips. You can also be using the chat box for asking a question. And so right now, I'd like to give an introduction of our two speakers. First, Liz Laganai Medicine Crow, a wonderful, longtime, fierce and dedicated advocate for Indigenous communities and ways of life is joining us. She's president and CEO of First Alaskans Institute, and their vision is progress for the next 10,000 years. She'll be able to share more about herself with you in just a moment, but really happy to have you here. We also have Senator Elvi Gray-Jackson with us. She began her career in public service with the municipality of Anchorage over 3 decades ago. She first began working for the Anchorage Assembly as an administrative assistant, and then as a senior budget analyst, and finally as a director of budget and legislative services office. She later served on the Assembly and representing District 4 from 2008 to 2017. And during that time, she was vice chair from 2014 to 2016 and chair from 2016 to 2017. We are so lucky that she was also then elected to the state Senate, serving District I in 2018. So for both of you, we just say welcome and gunashish ha'a, and thank you for joining us today. You each have such incredible stories of how people come together to shape policy for important change. And so for our audience, Laganai and Elvi are each going to give some opening sharing and share some stories. And I'm just going to get us started with some questions for each of you. And then later our audience is going to be able to do some Q&A with Laganai and Elvi. So first to Laganai, just you and many others were involved in the passage of House Bill 216 in 2014, recognizing Alaska Native languages. As you introduce yourself, can you share the significance of that policy, the story of how that came together, and some of the challenging or more satisfying aspects of that process?
Ganeshish, Hawa, Polly, Kendra, and all of the people who've been working to make this happen, and Ganeshish for inviting me and First Alaskans Institute to be part of this conversation. And also, I really want to recognize being here with my sister, Senator Elvi Gray-Jackson, who's done some incredible work that we've been able to be a little bit of a part of. So I just want to recognize her and thank her for that. Karala'is, good people. Nun Kwaigai Git Kianan Sinudi Nan Kiagan. Nun Kwaigai Git Kianans is my grandmother. What's my grandmother? Mona Jackson. She was from Heidelberg, and then married my grandfather and lived her life here in quen, Alaska. Ganahake Hinodi Chan Kiagan. Ganahake was my grandfather. Tommy Jackson Sr. Hath Lungadas, he was Tlingit. Delachini Hinudi Aukiang. Delachini is my mother. She's a teacher and a weaver. She makes her home in Quechua and in Juneau. Bilchini Hinudi Khadkiang. Bilchini is my father. He makes his home in our community here of Quechua. Lagunai Hinudi Khadkil Dikiang. Lagunai is my Khadkil name, my Haida name. Please feel free to call me Lagunai. Gatsakas Gustu Dikwalagan, I am Eagle. Chichkitne Janas Uda Ijong, and I'm a Chichkitne woman. Our crest is the hummingbird. I'm also Tlingit. Katsas Yuchat Duasal. Katsas is my Tlingit name. Yech Nachatsati, I am Raven. Kachari Ayachat, and my clan is Kachari, the freshwater Mark Sakai salmon people. And I'm here at home in our village of Quechua, the village that never sleeps, in the center of the universe. So I'm really happy to be here. It's appropriate for me to introduce myself this way because that's how I introduce my ancestors to yours and to you. And it is the way that we as Native people share respect. Absent an introduction, even a shorter one, without letting you know who we are, it's something that signals something. So I wanted to make sure that I was giving you good signals, good vibes coming to you from Quechua. So to your question, Polly, the passage of the Alaska Native Languages Recognition Bill was a couple hundred years in the making. And there were so many people who have passionately advocated for the rightful place of our languages. These languages exist nowhere else. These languages are the languages of the land here in Alaska. And we, the Native people, are its conduit, its expression. And so it's crazy that we even had to go through all of this to get to this point where a bill could be passed in the state of Alaska's legislature. So I just really want to say that out loud first. It's crazy that nothing less than a revolution was required in order for the languages of the state of Alaska to be recognized as the languages of the state of Alaska. So now to the current effort that ended up passing. It was our young people who led this effort. I got to play a very small role in it. And it was their leadership, it was their vision, it was their voice. They did so much work to outreach to representatives and senators, to outreach to other Native leaders, to catalyze us to be involved, to get us to be supportive and to lend a hand in this hard work. And it was these young people. There was a large group of them from the University of Alaska Southeast, which is quite impactful as an institution because it is an institution that has slowly started to understand that being on Tlingit land meant that they have to have a good relationship. And through that, they've been bringing on more and more powerful young people who are attending their classes and who are using their voice and their hard work to effectuate really good change that has been long needed. And so it was this group, the student group, the Native group, Wuchiin, amongst many others, but this was a group of young people who were really dedicated in spending their time doing the hard labor to make sure that this bill had a fighting chance. And let's be really clear about the context. Any bill related to Alaska Native people in the state legislature of Alaska has a pretty high improbability of passing. There's many reasons for it, and we can get into all of that. But these young people did not let them be a barrier. They didn't let people telling them, why just recognition? That's not very impactful. That's just symbolic. But they knew what the truth of it is that symbol has power. Symbol is the door opening. It's not the end and it's not the beginning, but it's part of the process. And they focused so heavily on making sure that people understood the history of our languages, where they came from, why they were so important. They reached out, they did the hard work, and they brought us in. And when the legislature found ways to create barriers to stop it from moving forward, because there's all kinds of technical barriers that can be used and were used to stop this bill from progressing, the young people, our young leaders, they didn't stop. And they organized a sit-in on Easter. They organized a sit-in on Easter when everyone should be at home with their families, celebrating as they would normally, however they recognize it or not. But they organized a sit-in on a Sunday, on an Easter. And there was a technical holdup in the process because it wasn't getting scheduled to be heard by the committee that needed to kind of get it through the doors in order for it to then land on the floor and be able to be voted on. And these young people didn't give up. They called for a sit-in. The first, from what we understand and from what we've been able to find out, led by young Native people to take over the halls of the state legislature to draw attention to the importance of this bill moving forward. It was through their persistence that it happened. It was through them showing up and taking time to fill those halls with elders, with other Native people, and through their leadership made sure that they were strategically putting people in front of those doors who could not be ignored. One of the most impactful moments for me was when Ethel Lund and Selena Everson, who are elders and Tlingit language speakers, came to the halls of the legislature to show their support of the young people and to stand up once again, as they had for many years previous, advocating for our Native peoples. And it was a really powerful moment between these elders and our young people, as you could see the transferring of the baton essentially. They were there to encourage them. They were there to hold up their efforts. And it was so moving and powerful. So the combination of that with the other thing that was so impactful was Wushji'in, a local dance group led by Lyle and Colleen James. They also came with their full dance group. Many of them were the young people who'd been leading this effort. And they brought their drums and we sang inside the halls of the state legislature. Why? Because that building belongs to us. There was many people unhappy about that, but not us. Because our drum is our heartbeat and it's our voice, and it is how we show a collective energy and power. Those tools belong to us as well. And so that was how we really were able to collectively bring the people into the people's house and make sure that a law that should have been passed long ago and wasn't even necessary to pass was passed. Show up.
Wow. Yeah, how Nanashish Lagunai, really powerful story. And I'm sure that people listening to this also are just filling up with inspiration on that story, but also some questions. And so what I'm going to do now is turn to Senator Elvi Gray-Jackson, Elvi, and just say that, you have a long track record in public service and a reputation as being down to earth and a super accessible policymaker. And in our prep for this webinar, you shared a couple of inspiring examples of policy change at the local and state level that you've been involved with, that some feel very, very resonant with some of the moments that we're in right now. Could you share those with our audience as you also, introduce yourself and your story, highlighting how, as a policymaker, you've worked with the community to make those changes, why that's important, and what was that process like as well? And welcome, Elvi.
Thank you. First, I want to say it's truly an honor to be here with my sister, Laganai, and the other 50 participants. It just, and your story, Laganai, it was very emotional. And it brought tears to my eyes, but I had to hold my hands like this because I need to not be crying while I'm talking. But anyway, I've been in this community for 38 years. I'm originally from New Jersey. And I've been involved in public service basically from almost when I first got here. I began working for the municipality the year after I got here, which was in 1983. And as Polly mentioned, my first job, I was an administrative assistant with the transit director. And then I went to work for the assembly, and I worked for them for 18 years. And their constituents, and I had an opportunity to run for office myself and have my own constituents, and I did run for office. My first time out was in 2007, and I worked really, really hard. I lost to a wealthy incumbent, but I didn't give up. I ran again the following year, and I won by, I think it was 47%, and I ran for re-election in 2008, and I won by 60%. And in 2014, I ran for my last term, and I ran unopposed. But even though I was unopposed, I still worked hard. I did mailers, I knocked on doors, and then it's interesting because when I was knocking on doors, folks used to say to me, "Why are you knocking on my door? You don't have an opponent." And my response was, "Because I want you to vote for me because you really believe I made a difference, not because you don't have a choice." And then I was termed out in 2017 and wondering what I was going to do next. And I decided, okay, I'm going to take a break. So I'm going to watch The View at 9 o'clock. I'm going to watch The Price is Right at 10 o'clock, and then Wendy at 11. And lo and behold, out of nowhere, I had no idea this was going to happen because my opportunity to go to Juneau was 3 of my friends, Harriet, Representative Drummond, Representative Josephson, and then Senator Berta Gardner. And I was sure that everybody was going to remain in their seats, and I was happy about that. But Senator Gardner decided that she was going to retire after 14 years. And the message was really, really clear. I had to do it, and I'm so glad I did, because public service is my passion. And I'm not a typical politician. And I say that because unfortunately, a lot of politicians, they get elected and then they develop a false sense of power and authority. And I have never been, I will never be that person. And that's one of the things that causes our constituents to be intimidated and feel like, oh my gosh, I can't call my legislator because, they're my legislator. But everybody knows that I'm accessible, that frankly, I like being called Elvi. But when you're in Juneau, you have to be addressed by Senator. And I guess if everybody else is being addressed that way in Juneau, I want to be addressed that way too. But my personal preference is Elvi. I'm elected to work for you. And that's a thing that I think that everybody needs to remember. When you feel intimidated, remember, we're there because you put us there. And you have a right to be able to reach out to your legislator and not feel intimidated, not feel that you can't. And when people come and visit me, even when I was in Anchorage as an assembly member, I like to make folks comfortable. I tell them from the outset, I'm probably the most laid back legislator you'll ever meet. And that's what I want to be. I want people to feel comfortable talking to me and reaching out and sharing their ideas and asking for my help, because that's why I'm there. And I'm going to talk about 2 things. First, I'm going to go all the way back to Anchorage when I was staff to the Assembly for 18 years. For 17 years, every Martin Luther King Day, birthday, I took a leave day. And for 5 of those years, I think it was Channel 2, KTUU, they used to interview me. They'd interview me, and then they interviewed another employee who didn't take the day off. And because I thought it was important to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King, who made such a difference in my life and the lives of many others. And I had talked about making it a municipal holiday for so long, but you know, I was staff. But what happened was I was on the elevator with Assembly Member Kendall, and he said to me, he said, "Well, I saw you on TV last night talking about Martin Luther King's holiday and birthday and why you take it off every year." And he said it was just it was so powerful, and it was just so it meant so much to me. And so I responded with, "Did it mean enough to you to support making Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday a holiday, a municipal holiday in Anchorage?" And he said yes. The message was clear. So I did all the work. I drafted the ordinance. I did the homework in terms of cost. And other communities within the state of Alaska, which made my heart really glad when I found out how many other communities in the state of Alaska had already had Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday. And so anyway, I did all the homework. I got 6 assembly members to sign on the ordinance, and they, of course, introduced the ordinance, and there was a public hearing, and the rest is history. In 1999, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday became a municipal holiday, and I'm so proud of that effort. And another thing I'd like to talk about is just working with my constituents to get things done. And one of the issues that I worked with just before I left the assembly was working with Pamela Miller on a pesticide ordinance. And one of the things that I like to do before I actually introduce any ordinance, and at the state level bill, I like to bring all the stakeholders to the table. And what I did with this particular issue, I empowered Pamela and others to bring something forward to me that I could introduce. And we worked together. We had several meetings, and all the stakeholders were there, and there were changes made to the ordinance. And when the ordinance was at the point where everybody could agree on it, I introduced the ordinance. It was set for public hearing, and unlike so many other issues, that public hearing had only 2 people testify, and it was passed almost unanimously. And I'm so very proud of that moment, which really made a difference in our community in terms of our environment. But again, I'm so honored to be here, and if there are questions, I love questions. So thank you.
Thank you for both of you sharing those stories. And I think what is, hearing you talk about this, and this is something that we really wanted to bring together, was the stories on how policy is made. Because as we saw when Polly asked the question, what do you think of policy? We're thinking wonky, bureaucracy, suits and ties, kind of unapproachable. But what's great about hearing these stories is how can we as individuals make these impacts in our state? And I think that you've really laid it out nicely. And something that I really appreciate about I was in the building, I was a staff member during the Native Languages Bill. I was there, I was in the building for 10 years as a staff member before coming to NPA. And what I just loved was hearing our songs, hearing our drumming, and knowing we are here and you will listen and you will pay attention. And that is something that was so powerful, as being someone in the building that just hadn't seen a lot of that before. And I would like to see more of that, I guess is what I'm saying. Is I saw committee rooms filled with people across the state speaking our native language and saying how important this was, and seeing that it was really student led and it was led by the people. And this is how policy should be made. And I do share frustration, though, is it shouldn't take that much work to do something that should have been done a long time ago. But seeing the persistence and seeing and saying, no, like, this is our government. We elect individuals to do the things that we want as Alaskans. And so that was some beautiful moments. And I remember my Auntie Ethel being there, and it was just so great to have her there, and Selena. And it was just something that really sticks in my mind, as being in the building at that time. So I just wanted to say I appreciate the stories. And from Elvi, you've made lots of impacts from, before you were an elected official. And I think that's also important to highlight is we have the power to make that change. And this is what this series is about, and this is really empowering. We're catalyzing change. We're empowering individuals on how to do that. And so we're looking at it as how do we really break down those barriers too. If I say I have an idea and I can go to my legislator and say, here's an idea that I have for this policy, or this is something that needs to be changed in the state, and really want to implore people to contact their legislator, or their assembly member or council member of anywhere that you're at across Alaska when you have an idea, and bring it to them, as they're really there to help and to make those changes. And so thank you for sharing the stories. And I'm looking in the chat. Here's a question from Della. Hi, Della. How will we work together to get resources to help revitalize our languages? And maybe I'll pass that one to Lagunai.
Yeah, my mom and I are both here at our house in Cake. She's just next door. The Zoom technology is pretty hilarious. So I think that really is a good question just for framing some of the process at the legislative level. And, one of the things that one of the senators was really concerned with was about the fact that there's 20 Alaska Native languages now that would be recognized as official languages of the state of Alaska. And, there's all kinds of parts of this process that people have to understand when we talk about policy making at the legislative level, right? So Kendra mentioned earlier it having to go through committees, and I mentioned earlier it having a problem getting scheduled for the final committee, and for getting scheduled to the floor for a vote. And there's all kinds of rules about how the Senate internal to itself operates, same with the House, and how the majority and minority caucuses work. And sometimes that feels like a blockade for us being able to really know how to work through these barriers to equity, because it feels like you have to have no less than a law degree or a master's degree or something like that to know how to wind your way through it. But in fact, it doesn't take any of that. All it takes is that you are a person committed to your issue, and you can learn along the way. So never let that be a barricade to your voice. And they might use these barricades, and they might try to use these barriers within the process as tools in their process. They all think of it as a way that the system operates, the institution operates. But I call those out as inequitable tools, because it really is a hampering on the voice of the people. And so one of those concerns that the senator brought to a conversation that I had with him was that, well, now that we have if we recognize all these languages, we're going to have to pay for them. As if somehow that's unjust or unwarranted or unnecessary. And it just kind of is like, all this bill is a bill of recognition right now. And that's all we're looking for, is recognition of our languages. Anything else that comes after that is going to take more work anyway. So this shouldn't be something that holds this up. And, to the question that my mother was asking about how do we continue to get resources there, I think that's what you see so many policymakers now trying to work on and work for. One of the ones most recently that impacts us here at home in quen territory, or Kikau, our territory around our village, is the returning of Skanach Bay, the real place name for a place that was named after a horrible incident where our village was bombed by the United States. And we reclaimed that name long ago. But going through the process, the legislative process, and then the US Geographic Service process as well, is a huge barricade, but it's not going to stop us. So we reclaim these things one bit at a time until we can do them all comprehensively. And the state also has an Alaska Native Languages Preservation and Advisory Council, which was put in place long before the Languages Bill was passed, I think by about, I want to say, a couple years, maybe 4 years. And that work needs to be paid attention to. They are an advisory group of language experts, our native language experts, who put together recommendations for the governor and for the state legislature. So those recommendations need to be implemented. The funding needs to be followed. I just really want to say most impactfully that Alaska Native people should not have to pay to learn our languages. They are a birthright, and they need to be restored to all of us that it was taken from. And that is something that the state of Alaska could do as a way of bringing some truth, racial healing, and transformation to Alaska. So in terms of making it accessible and getting the funding where it needs to be, those are all things that the state can be really helpful in, as long as, again, nothing about us without us is for us, right? That old African proverb that so many of us use. So they need to do it with the advice and guidance of our Alaska Native language teachers and our culture bearers. Nishtishwa for the question.
Goodness, appreciate that. You know, some things to think on too for these things that we want to see done is having everybody reach out to their legislators, you know, via emails to them, phone calls to them, of seeing different things that we want to have done and pass, and you know, the pressure that we can put on that, and it's supporting each other and what we need to have done. A question here from Barry, and I will pass this one over to Elvi. What place would you recommend looking or going to a first step for people who want to help advocate for policy change but don't know where to start?
Thank you. Can we go back a little bit, because I have a really quick comment to make in terms of what Lagunai said about committees. If I can do that, can I do that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, thank you. Number one, it was an insult even bringing up money in terms of the language bill, for starters. And then when it comes to committees, I just think it's an insult the way the committee process works. And it's all political. And I don't agree with it, to the point that I gave a floor speech talking about it during the first session. And I'm going to give that floor speech again, because it's power trips, number one. Depends on who's chairing a committee, and it's so wrong. You know, it's an injustice to our community, to our constituents who want to see things move along. And a lot of time is wasted. And I'm going to work real hard to make some change, the best that I can. So anyway, I had to make that comment. But back to the question. Can you repeat it again, if you don't mind, please? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. What place would you recommend looking or starting as a first step for people who want to help advocate for policy change but do not know where to start?
Okay, I think what people need to do is to start at the local level and familiarize yourself with who your assembly representatives are, because you get two. If you live in the downtown area, you only have one, but that's probably going to change after the census is done and redistricting. But reach out, know who your assembly members are, and reach out. You know, it's their responsibility to return your emails, to respond to your emails, to make return calls. And when you do reach out to your assembly members and they don't respond, make a big deal about it. Call them out on it, because they should be responded. And the same is true at the state level. Find out who your representatives are. You'll usually have, I think it'll be 2 representatives and then 1 senator. Find out who they are, and reach out to them. I think that is really important. And it's hard for me to say, well, don't be intimidated, because I think a lot of people are, but remember, when you're feeling intimidated, remember they are there because you put them there, and you have a right to ask for their help no matter what the situation may be. So, and if you need some personal coaching, please feel free to call me and I'll help you get there. Thank you.
Could I respond to Elvi really quickly?
Yes, please.
I just want to give an example of what she just said through the Native Languages Bill process. It's one of my favorite personal memories. As an auntie, as a Native auntie, we have a responsibility to help lift up our young people and to give them advice and guidance when they seek it, and let them do what they can without like micromanaging them, you know, and unless of course they're on the brink of falling off a cliff, but we have to help them get strong enough to carry on the work. And during the advocacy that was happening for the Languages Bill, it became very clear that we don't know how all the senators are going to vote. So people were trying to figure out, well, who's going to vote yes, who's going to vote no, how much support do we actually have in the Senate, you know, what's going to happen with it. You know, if you look at the bill now, you're not going to actually know, unless you go all the way back through to the beginning, how many senators were not signed on as co-sponsors, because after a bill passes, they have the ability to add their names to it. So so when you look, when people were talking in the halls and trying to figure out, well, if it gets to the floor, will it pass? This group of young leaders approached me and said, what do we need to do? What can we do? How are we going to make sure that this passes? And I said, well, have you talked to all of the senators and found out how they feel? And they were like, well, we've talked to these ones, you know, the sponsors, the co-sponsors. And I said, well, you could go and ask them. Don't walk away without an answer. Just as an advocacy tip 101, you know, it's really easy to get non-answers from politicians. So keep your question clear and simple and ask for a simple response. And I thought they were all gonna, like, you know, go off and check in with senators and kind of do their visits. But this group, oh no, they knew that they were stronger together. And they went into every office of the senators together as a group. For all the ones that they didn't already know for sure, as a group, they went into every Senate office and asked to speak to the senator and asked, are you voting for this bill? Will you vote for this bill? And when they came back, you could just see, like, you could see within them that they had received information that helped them understand the pathway that this bill would have for passage, as long as it could get scheduled on the floor. And so that was a really exciting way to see them not get intimidated by the process. And, you know, one of the things that we all know is take a buddy with you. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to do it alone at all. Goodness, sheesh.
Can I make one quick comment? I was raising my hand, but I guess you didn't see it. But can I make one quick comment? Okay, in terms of advocacy, when you have an issue, okay, I think it's really important not to just talk to senators and representatives who are signed on to the bill. It's important to reach out to all 60 of us, whether you think they're going to support it or not, reach out, because then they can't say, well, you didn't have a conversation with me, when you have had that conversation. And then it's up to them to make a decision to do the right thing. But it's important to not just reach out to those that have sponsored a bill, but to reach out to everybody. And you have a group of folks that come to Juneau, you know, you can share the meeting to reaching out with each other. But it's important to do that, and even on the local level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There are some questions in the chat too, asking, you know, how do you get specific information? And so I just wanted to share, you know, we've got about 10 minutes left, but there's a number of different resources, and we're gonna be putting out some more things. We've got a presentation that we'll post on our website for Native Peoples Action You can check out our website, nativepeoplesaction.org. And I know the Alaska Center puts up a lot of information too, about advocacy, some tips about advocacy, how to get involved, but also we're a resource. I am happy to share any type of information with anyone about the legislative process and my experience, just as a staff member and how things work. And I think that that's something that I always, offer up to people, because it can be an intimidating experience. But someone that has, been there and worked there, and I've done even sit downs of running through how, a bill becomes a law, because that's even a process that can be confusing. On paper, it might look one way, but really in reality, it works another way, as we talk about, politics that kind of really shape on how or whether things move or not. So when a bill gets introduced, you can pull it up on the Alaska Legislature website. And then when the bill gets introduced, it'll get committee referrals. And so it'll list out what those committee referrals are. And you can go find out more information from the sponsor of the bill. You can talk with the committee chair, people that are on that specific committee that are hearing the bill, to understand, to know if it's going to be scheduled for a hearing and when those hearings are. And you could even sign up to get notifications of when bills are going to be heard, so you know when public testimony is going to be. A lot of different nonprofit organizations, we follow different bills, and we put out, alerts, advocacy alerts, things what's going on. So please, use those resources that are available, and look at some advocacy tips. But yes, talking with every single legislator, I think, is also, it's definitely important. So, if there's a bill that you're working on, if you have the votes to get it through the committee process, if you have the votes for the floor, and just talking with people that have been involved can help maybe break down some of those barriers. And I love what Log and I said, is going in as a group and being together, so you can do it together. So you can find out information, Alaska Legislature website, check out Native People's Action, look at the Alaska Center website as well. I know there's lots of other websites and nonprofits that are putting out information. There's a bunch of questions now coming in, but let's see. I'll post in some websites you can look at. I know Kelsey's been putting some in there. One more question before I think we're going to have to start wrapping things up. Do you think there are limitations to what policy can accomplish? Are there other avenues for change that work alongside policy change? Liz, Lagunai, I see your hand up, or Elvi.
I think Elvi was ready to go first, so I'll follow up after her.
And I may not answer the question, but I'm going to do my best, because I'm going back to some comments that Kendra made. And what's unfortunate is it depends on who the committee chair is, whether or not your bill gets heard. And if it's a bill that they don't like, then, your bill is not going to be heard. It's certainly not in a timely manner. And that's unacceptable to me. It really is. But in terms of other ways, even when there's not a bill or an issue that you're concerned with, reach out to your legislator, your representatives anyway, and just say, hi, I'm your constituent, and I was just saying hello. Especially if you can make a trip to Juneau, and even if you can't make a trip to Juneau, just reaching out. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Yeah, goodness, Chief Elvi. One of the things that I think is really important for people to understand, something that has really helped me, and it was guidance that one of my mentors gave me, is to remember that these are just people. And as just people, they have no other higher authority than you. They may select and choose, like Elvi said at the beginning, to allow getting elected to public office to go to their head. But that shouldn't stop you from realizing these are just people. Don't give them more power than they should have. We control that. They're just people. So when you're engaging with them, engage with them as equals, period. You represent our Native people, especially if you're speaking on behalf of our issues. So you're never alone. We're there with you. Our ancestors are there with you. So speak to them as equals, and never feel like you have to ingratiate yourself to anyone, but especially elected officials. They work for us. Whether they are actually representing our views or not, they are paid by the state of Alaska. They are paid by us, and most of them are really, even if you have a difference of idea about what is good policy or what is good law, most of them are good enough people to sit down and have conversations with you. And that's how you begin. You have to begin with a good relationship. They can either return that or they can show you who they really are. And so that gets to the other question, which is around, is there anything else we can do besides policy? Absolutely. There's so much more to do. Policy is just one mechanism for a voice. The other is showing up to elections and voting. You have to get out to vote. And we have to bring and drag and kick and scream our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, our children who are 18 or over. Let's just drag everybody that we love to the polls. Because especially if we as Indigenous people, our Black brothers and sisters, our other peoples of color, and our white brothers and sisters who understand and are working alongside of us in solidarity with this work, we could really control all of the votes. We could really make an impact in all of the districts. It just requires that we turn out to vote. And policy is just one way that we have a voice. So there's other mechanisms as well. Learn our languages, engage back with our cultures if we haven't had a chance to, get out on the land and water, create a relationship with our animals. All of these things help us to be stronger, center our well-being, and then give us a stronger voice when we do go into places where we have to be advocates.
Hawa, appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Marie for some closing comments and wrapping this up. So thank you so much for joining us today. I loved hearing from both of you.
Oh, figuring out how to get off of mute and onto video very smoothly. Thanks. Well, first off, I think actually we can skip on from these two slides to this, yes, time to take action slide. So as Laguna and as Elvi have mentioned, there are a bunch of wonderful resources. We couldn't possibly begin to cover all of them, but I will mention a few. One is Native People's Actions page. Get Involved Advocacy, really easy to remember. There are a bunch of beautiful graphics that teach you everything from how the bill process following works and how legislation gets passed to how to get in touch with your representative. The Alaska Center has a similar resource. But the most important part that I want to call out is if you are interested in policy and if you are interested in passing these things and getting more involved, a great way to make your voice heard, as Laguna and as Elvi have mentioned, is by voicing who you want to be your representative. And you have a chance to do that by voting. And this year, you can register to vote at home and vote by mail. I know the coronavirus is something that we've all been thinking about, and how to vote safely is a big concern. So if that's something you're interested in doing, you can request that ballot to be sent to you by mail, and you can do that online if you have a DMV state driver's license or any form of state ID. So I will just call that out. That takes about 5 minutes. So in between now and 2:05, you all can get your ballots by mail if you choose to. So then the next thing I want to call to, if we can just go to the next slide, is to just give a huge, huge thank you, Koyana Gunachish, for joining us, for our speakers and our guests today. I couldn't be more honored to hear from you both and more. Yeah, more graced with a way to make your Tuesday so much better by being inspired. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all so much for listening in. Again, this is the first webinar in the Tanch o Nish Nush Idadak series. So in Catalyzing Change, you should look out for more webinars in the future. This policy series, I think our next webinar will focus on voting rights and access, and that'll come in early August, so we all get a chance to fish for the rest of this month. So stay tuned to Facebook, stay tuned to your email, and again, just thank you, and ending this with a ton of gratitude. So yeah, I think with that, Kendra, if you have anything final to close us with, I'll just say thank you here.
You said it beautifully. Thank you. Bye. Gunaji Shawa.